Welcome back to Open Exchange. Well, we're still waiting to hear whether there will be tariffs on chicken imported to the country. It's been a very inflamed debate, and the tariffs could go up by as much as 300%. And that increase, of course, would cause chicken prices to go up, or could cause them to go up by between 30 and 50% at the tills. Joining me now to discuss this is Kevin Lovell, CEO of the South African Poultry Association. Morning, Kevin. The last time you were in here, I realized what a complex debate this is. You speak to one side and you think, oh, you've convinced me, and then you speak to the other. It's such a difficult one. Now, we're going to hear from Minister Rob Davies in a moment, but let's talk about try and break down this problem about the tariffs. One thing we didn't talk about last time was South Africa's industry is one thing, but there is an African chicken industry, chicken demand. Where do we sit in relation to that? And if these tariffs are changed, how could that affect it?
Well, I think the main thing to see what is the purpose of these tariffs for South Africa or any other African country is to look after its own industry's needs. Tariffs for South Africa are necessary. Tariffs for all other African countries are also necessary if you believe that feeding yourselves means growing as much of it yourself as you can. That's a policy space. The reason that we have the poultry coming in is because largely it's stuff that other people don't want elsewhere in the world, and wherever that elsewhere in the world might be. That won't change for other African countries as well. We would really, really like to encourage all of our neighbouring countries to be as active in promoting their own production as we are.
How much do we export to Africa at the moment?
About 0.5% of what we produce, and we produce less than 2% of what the world does. So we think we're big, but we're very small.
And how much does Africa produce for itself, the rest of Africa?
We're the biggest consumer per capita within Africa, if you exclude Mauritius, that is. And I think that's going to stay that way for a while, but in due course, Africa will be the home of the global poultry market for the world. And that's because globally pork's the world's biggest meat, and it'll never be that in Africa. So as Africa develops and these opportunities that we look for are realized in all of our within all of Africa, more and more chicken will be eaten. We're actually the future of growth of poultry on a global scale. In the medium term, in the short term, Asia will still be the growth of poultry.
Depending how we manage it, of course. Well, CNBC did ask South Africa's Minister of Trade and Industry, Rob Davies, when the tariffs on chicken would be imposed, if they would be imposed. This is what he had to say.
Well, there's a couple of processes of consultation that we're going through. I have received the report from the International Trade Administration Commission on their recommendations on tariffs in the poultry industry. There's a few more consultations we need to go through before we take a decision on the recommendation.
South Africa's Trade and Industry Minister Rob Davies kicking for touch there. No, we don't know, really. I would think it's one of the issues that this department has to wrestle with. It is complicated, and they have a lot to consider.
They've got to find balance. The key is that tariffs are so-called fair trade measures. In other words, it's a policy space you can use. So he's sitting with a recommendation from an administrative body, ITAC, the expert agency, saying do X. We don't know what the X is. He has to consider, if he does X, what will the implications be, and weigh those up against various other sort of state policy objectives. It's not an easy thing. We know it's been sitting on his desk for a while. We also accept that he can't simply put a thumbprint on and send it on. He does need to reflect. We also know that if he doesn't approve it, we're in severe trouble.
Is it being simplistic to say that if tariffs are imposed, high tariffs, the prices will go up for consumers already under pressure? If they are not, a significant part of the South African industry goes out of business forever.
I think there are two ways to respond to the price argument, and they're important. The first one is it only affects imported product, doesn't affect local product. Imported product is only a percentage of the total market. What will the effect be on prices? Muted. The effect for importers on their products will be greater, but the effect on the total market, small. The second part is that this tariff application only affects the imports from countries other than the European Union, and there are a few others as well. And we might get more imports from Europe as a consequence of these tariffs, so ultimately prices might not go up much, if at all.
Well, that's quite a statement, given what the opposition to this is saying.
Because you've got to average the whole market. You can't just look at the products that they sell, but you've got to look at the products in totality.
Now, what about the businesses? I mean, we've had Astral, we've had Rainbow. Rainbow yesterday, trading update, their share price down on that, talking about earnings dropping by 70, 80, 90%. So clearly, in financial terms, these companies are stressed. There's an argument, which we've heard before in discussions here, about they are not as competitive as they should be.
Well, I think firstly, often people, when they read horror stories or hear horror stories or see horror stories, think people are making it up. It should be clear to all the viewers that this industry is in severe distress. There should be no doubt now. We have repeatedly had this. You didn't mention it, but AFGRI announced impairment of their assets, 117 million rand, a few weeks ago. This is a severely distressed industry. If it doesn't get relief, and the tariff is only one part, action against the European Union is the second part, we will continue to suffer, and eventually the suffering will cause failure. When does it go from suffering to failure? That's something you have to ask each of the companies themselves, but it is a natural consequence.